Hey lefties, it's Ellen here again, and today I'm going to show you the most basic stitch in knitting, the knit stitch. So if you've watched my other two videos, you've already learned how to cast on, you've learned how to hold the yarn with proper tension in your right hand as a lefty, and now we're going to move on to the actual knit stitch. If you're liking these videos, please do give me a thumbs up like, subscribe to the series, and also hit that little bell icon so you know when I upload each next video. All right, let's get at it. So we've cast on 15 stitches. I am going to wrap my yarn around to hold in proper tension. Going to give myself a little more working yarn, and away we go. All right, so for purposes of this video and for all my videos, the left needle is going to be called the working needle. The right needle is going to be called the holding needle. And by holding needle, I mean it's the one holding all the stitches at the beginning of each row. The style of knitting I do is called continental mirror knitting, which is something I learned on Ravelry just yesterday. And it means that I move my stitches from the right needle to the left needle with each successive row. That's the mirror part. The lefty part, I don't know, maybe I'm just using my lefty as the driving needle. I don't know, but this is how I was taught and this is how I'm going to teach you. And it's worked for me for years. All right, when I talk about knitting, I really just talk about it as pulling loops through loops. So when I talk about a loop, I mean each of these stitches here is a loop. And then we're just going to be creating a loop out of this yarn here and kind of shoving it through each existing stitch. So when I talk about a loop, and I'm talking about wrapping the yarn, which I'll get into in a little bit, I really mean just wrapping the yarn around halfway. I know this doesn't look like a loop, but go with me here. This is what I'm calling a loop. So you're not going to ever be wrapping around twice for this stitch. You're really just going to be holding your needle, your left needle like this in a way that creates kind of an open loop. And it's that's going to get shoved through this stitch and pulled through to create your knit stitch. All right, a couple things about this yarn I want to point out to you. This is called a triple ply yarn, and you can see it right here. This individual strand of yarn is actually comprised of 3 strands of yarn, 3 different plies that are twisted together by the manufacturer, and it makes for a nice, puffy, warm, cozy, squishy yarn, and I love it. The one thing I'm pointing out to you though is you need to really make sure that when you're picking up a stitch, you're picking up all 3 of those plies. I've been working with this yarn a little bit, trying to get these videos right, and the plying is kind of coming apart a little bit. It's not a problem, but sometimes it's called the yarn can split. And you want to make sure that when you're picking up a stitch, you're picking up the complete stitch, not just one of those 3 plies or 2 of those 3 plies, because then you're going to end up adding stitches to your row inadvertently. You're not going to know what you've done. Some stitches will be thicker, some will be thinner, some will be stronger, some will be weaker. It's not what you're going for. Okay, so the knit stitch, the basic stitch of all knitting, is again just bringing a loop through a loop. So what you're going to do is with the tip of your left needle, your working needle, you're going to insert it into the stitch that's on the resting needle. And when I talk about stitches, I'm only referring to the ones that are actually on the resting needle. And you're going to insert that working needle from the bottom of the stitch to the top, bringing your working needle behind your resting needle through the stitch itself. Now sometimes I need to bring the yarn a little bit out of tension with that first stitch to make it a little bit easier to insert the needle, but you're going to insert the needle from the bottom, bring it up diagonally behind the resting needle, making sure that you've inserted it into the loop that's wrapped around the resting needle. You don't want to insert it in between 2 stitches like that. See that? That's what you don't want to do. You want to make sure that your working needle is actually entering into the stitch that's wrapped around the resting needle. Okay, so this is bad. In between 2 stitches is bad. Coming up through a single stitch is exactly what you're looking for. You're going to use your right middle finger to keep that tail from the long tail cast on out of the way, and you are going to wrap the yarn around your working needle. Use your left pointer finger to hold onto the yarn, pressing it up a little bit against the working needle. So when you basically are shoving this loop through the existing stitch, you don't lose track of the yarn. All right, so now it looks like we've got two stitches. We've got our stitch that we just created, and we have the old stitch. The next step you need to do is to take the old stitch off of the resting needle. Just let it slip off. That's what you want. And you can tug just a little bit to keep your tension going. In between the first and the second stitch, after you do a long tail cast on, you are going to get the tail of the cast on kind of flopping around. I just hold it in back and hold it out of the way. You can see I'm kind of holding it here just to keep it out of the way, and I can begin my next stitch. So we're going to take the tip of the left needle, insert it not this way, not from the top down, from the bottom up, crisscrossed, not parallel, crisscrossed. Going to confirm that I've brought that needle through the loop, not in between the two stitches, but into the actual stitch. I'm going to wrap the yarn around the working needle, use my finger to guide it through, and then I'm going to shove the stitches up a little bit more toward the tip of the resting needle to guide that stitch off the resting needle, and now I have two stitches on the working needle. I will do it again. In from the bottom up and behind. I'm through the stitch, which is a beautiful thing. I'm going to wrap the yarn around, and I'm going to guide that yarn through the loop and take the old loop off the resting needle, and now I've got a new stitch on the working needle, and it is a thing of beauty. I will do it again and again and again. In the stitch through the bottom, out the stitch diagonally behind. I'm going to wrap the yarn. I'm going to use my finger and guide it through, and there you go. Now you'll see I'm going to speed up a little bit, and I'm going to stop exaggerating the wrapping motion and the holding the yarn with my left finger against the left needle. That did it right there. Because when you have proper tension here and through your hand, the way I showed you to a couple videos ago, you actually can just use the tension in the yarn and use the working needle to wrap the needle around the yarn and pull it through, rather than wrapping the yarn around the needle. So I'll slow it down for these last two stitches. Now this stitch is tight. I must have cast it on a little more tightly, and I could already tell that I was going to have a little bit of a hard time shoving this left working needle into the stitch properly. So I'm just tugging that white loop just down a little bit to give me a little more space. So in the stitch it goes, wrapping and through, and the last stitch, wrapping and through. All right, there you go, the first row of knitting. Now I know this stitch looks a little funky, but that's okay. It's the end, and it'll even out when we do the next row. So you've gotten to the end of the row. Okay, now what? You can't knit backwards without flipping your work. So when you start a row, you always want to make sure that your tail is at the end. And as the style of knitter that I am, that's always going to be on the right. So I'm going to wrap my yarn again, give myself a little more room, and I'm going to start again. I'm keeping a nice tension in my yarn. Again, there's no death grip, and I'm not tugging and I'm not pulling, but I'm not loose, right? I have real control, but my hands are relaxed. Nothing's hurting, nothing's pinching, there's no muscle fatigue, and that can set in when you start. Really need to focus on just the right amount of tension, not too tight and not too loose. So you see what I mean when I just say it's loops through loops. Loops through loops. Wrapping it around and through. Now I've done 2 rows, and I want you to see what we've got here. So when you do, knit this way and knit that way and knit this way and knit that way, you're actually creating something called the garter stitch. I'm going to show you in a few more rows what it really looks like, but you get these really nice ridges. They're nice and puffy. The fabric lays flat. Everything's even. It's a really wonderful basic stitch to use for scarves or shawls. And so when you see a pattern that's done in garter stitch, you know, if you know how to do a knit stitch, that you can create that project, because all it is knit, 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 knit. All right, I'm going to do a few more rows. I'm flipping my yarn, my work, excuse me. So this just takes practice. At first, your hands are going to feel too loose. Then your hands are going to feel too tight. You just have to practice, practice, practice. Knitting's supposed to be relaxing and meditative, not stressful and tear-inducing. And I promise you, if you just work on a little swatch like this, listening to some great music, maybe with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, it's going to become very, very pleasurable. It's really satisfying. Oh my gosh, I'm totally loving what's happening here with these colors. Okay, oh God, look at that. All right, I'm gonna do one more row. Again, wrap the yarn around. Oop. And you want to work toward the tip of your needles. It's really impossible to work with your stitches all the way down here. You just can't do it. And you don't want to work too closely to the tip of your needles, because then you risk actually dropping stitches, which we'll cover in a different video. But as a beginner knitter, you don't want to deal with that. And as I'm continuing to work the stitches on the holding needle or the resting needle, I just scooch them forward with my thumb. Subconsciously, I'm not even aware that I'm doing it, to get the next stitch in line ready to be worked. This yarn is so squish-delish. I don't want to stop. It's just gliding off these needles. These are amazing. I'm just going to do one more row so we can see what all these fabulous colors look like worked into the fabric. And then you have to promise me that you're going to give it a try. Okay, that first stitch, I'm realizing what I'm doing subconsciously. See how I'm holding my left pointer finger here to keep the working yarn out of the way? I don't know why I do it, but I do. Okay, in it goes. Move my finger, do the wrapping, guide it through. Everything just feels so nice and soft and smooth. I promise you, if you practice, you'll get to the same kind of Zen meditative state that I'm in, except, you know, filming a video, not so Zen and meditative. That's for sure. This is harder than it looks, people. The video part, not the knitting part. All right. What do we have? We have a thing of painterly beauty. So we've got these nice ridges. The fabric is nice and squishy. I wish you could feel it. And the beauty of garter stitch is there's no right side and wrong side. So it looks the same on this side as it does on that side. So that, my friends, is how to do the knit stitch like a lefty. Again, if you like these videos, subscribe, hit like, hit the alert, the notification button, so you can see every time I post a new video for lefties. Lefty pride, lefty power, lefties unite, and there you go. Have fun, everybody. Bye.